Welcome to the Block and Tackle Show, hosted by Carl Block. Carl is a partner in the law firm of Loeb & Loeb here in Los Angeles, California. He will be tackling some of the biggest issues in business today. Listen, learn, and enjoy as he leaves no stone unturned during deep conversations with some of today's most amazing business leaders. Welcome to the show. Carl Block is both a corporate lawyer and a corporate restructuring partner in the Los Angeles office of Loeb & Loeb, LLP. Nothing in the podcast should be construed as legal advice. To the extent legal issues are discussed, please consult an attorney if you have any questions or need advice relating to the matters discussed. This podcast may constitute attorney advertising in certain jurisdictions. The views expressed in the podcast are not necessarily the views of Loeb & Loeb or Carl Block. Carl and each guest reserves the right to change any opinions that may be expressed on the show and disagree with what others say, even if such disagreement is not expressed during the podcast.
This is a beautiful segue to what I was going to next ask you about, and that's about company culture. So I've heard people say things to me like, you can build a company culture by money. You can throw gobs of money at people. That may or may not work, but that money talks for a lot of people. You can do it by having an amazing product. So if somebody's working at your company and they tell their friends, "Oh, I'm working at the X company. Oh my God, I love that product, blah, blah, blah." And that makes them feel good. And then there's the other sort of human aspects of the culture that can make things happen. And so I'm sort of curious, anytime a company goes through a restructure, culture is incredibly important, but also generally, what does it take to build a culture? I mean, are there three things you could say that you think are important to building a successful culture?
Yeah, there are, and I'll make them. I'll make them kind of maybe corporate speak, jargony things, but I'll unpack them a little bit. And if I were going to do three things, it would be first is clarity. I think a lot of culture initiatives go sideways because there isn't clarity. There isn't a clear definition of what you're actually trying to build, which requires you to take a real raw assessment of where you are today and define as a leadership team what's not working in there and what exactly are the outcomes we're trying to achieve. Like, we have to have clarity and definition. Otherwise, how can we even articulate to our team what's not working and where we're headed? And I think so many people just get that wrong. They're effectively like, we want people to work harder, or we want this place to be fun, or what does that crap mean? So I think getting into a spot where you just have to have real clarity and real articulation around what culture is going to mean at your company. And that's everything from having really clear values and what you stand for. And then on the other things, what behaviors do you need to see from people in order to have them be emblematic of the culture you're trying to deliver? And again, clarity is critical. The second piece is something like, to give it another C, it'd be communication. But I think if it's more like your say-do ratio, it's if you're going to say it and you have to communicate like crazy around these things, you have to live it. Like, that say-do ratio has to be incredibly high, because I think people are really attuned to when you're just speaking out of both sides of your mouth, or you're saying things but you don't deliver on them every single day, which also means you have to, within that communication piece, you have to celebrate when people do the things that you're looking for, exhibit the behaviors that are emblematic of your culture that you're trying to build. And on the flip side, you have to call people out and be really clear when somebody's going against it. And that kind of candor and that, the clarity piece is hard for, I think, a lot of companies, but it's critical. So for sure, clarity, say-do ratio, high communication is there. The last one would be commitment. And it's one of those, cultures are not, I don't believe they're built by money, or there's a version of a culture that's built just by money, and it's mercenaries. I don't think there is a place and a time for mercenaries, but it generally is not entire companies. But I think that you just have to know they're built over time. They're built with lots of reps and lots of cycles, and you just have to wash, rinse, repeat on clarity and communication and at high say-do ratio, and you have to stick with it. for a really long time, even when you have people that it might not be popular with. You're not going to make everybody happy. And I think it's where a lot of people go sideways is in that clarity piece. They try to bend it to the will of everybody instead of trying to define who they are going to be uniquely as a company and being willing to say, maybe this isn't the right place for you. And I think, again, that takes a huge amount of commitment to be able to do that and to be clear about who you are and what you're going to stand for, live it every single day and live it for a long time.
Those are three good credos to live by, I think. And, part of that, I think also, you were previously talking about building a team around you and having a culture of loyalty and candor, I think are super, super important. And, it's funny because when people talk in politics, hey, who are you going to vote for president? Okay. A lot of people will say or think the person I relate to, the person that I can believe in because their values align with mine and I think they're capable, but I relate to them. I've heard the barbecue test. Which one would you rather have at your barbecue, right?
Yep.
But at the end of the day, if you're building a culture using these C's and the say-do ratio, if you are relatable and your people believe in you and they think, with Rich at the helm, there is clarity, there is good communication, there is integrity, and he doesn't just talk, he can listen and he hears people. In your example, you have a team of people that you said were going circles around you. But generally speaking, if you're that person, I think you're so far, you're just on the goal line. Then you just have to have the product and the results and the performance. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's funny that, I do call this blocking and tackling in running a business, but yet it's lost on so many people.
Yeah, I think that's right. I wish you weren't right, but I think you're right. I do think that's right. I'll give you an example of I won't give the specific name, but a company I was working with and had actually really, really well defined and I think beautifully done values. The problem was the people talking about the values weren't exhibiting the values at all, and it's way too frequent where it just comes across immediately as inauthentic. And the example specifically was a chief revenue officer at a software company. Was always talking about customer obsession. And when I asked him, when's the last time you were on a customer call? When's the last time you actually sat in front of a customer? He's like, I haven't been. Like, how long have you been at the company? 16 months. Okay. How's your how's your focus on the customer value working for you? Like, how's your culture around customer focus again? It can't work if you're in that spot of like you're inauthentic in your delivery. And I just, unfortunately, that's far too common where we get wrapped up in the machinations of business and we forget how critical authenticity and a willingness to get in there and do what you're asking other people to do. I think it goes a long way.
I'm also a big fan of servant leadership. I've seen some people when the CEO can sit down with somebody and say, what can I do to help you do better? What do you need from us? What can we do? Those kinds of things. I think those small touches are amazing. And I'm sure you've been in situations where you're like, we need this group or we need this segment to do better. Let's just sit down with them and talk to them. Let's not bark at them from above. Yeah. Let's get into it internally too. Now, the other thing you said about, your revenue officer who didn't know their customers, we're going to talk about that a little bit in a few minutes about people who may not know their customers and what mistakes they might make in their marketing plans. But let me just turn quickly to, you've been obviously the CEO of a public company. You've been on public company boards. Another thing that I see people who say, you have entrepreneurs who want to take their company public. And a lot of people who say, I want to serve on a public company board. So you've been in the arena. What would you say to people about the good and bad of being on a public company board?
Yeah, I think this goes back a little bit to that whole, like, you're either strategic with these things or you're productive, or just a production oriented person with these things. I actually think I think public board service can be really good and can be really beneficial, not only for the individual, but for the company and for the broader management team. It can also be workflow and governance and not particularly helpful in growing or building a great business. I've seen both versions of it. And I think it gets back to how does the board itself and the management team think about the board? If the ones that I think are amazing, and I happen to be on one who thinks of it this way, they're thinking, how is our board a strategic advantage for the company? And when you have that situation, you have a level of engagement with the board, you have a level of transparency with the board, a frequency of engagement with the board that's just so different than the version that says we do this every 90 days because in order to comply with governance rules, that's what they need from us. Or we have this committee because we read about it and we should just do it because it looks good. When it's in our annual our annual summary on the business, and I think unfortunately in the public realm there's too many governance only boards and not enough strategic focus on what a board can be from a strategic advantage perspective. And I think within that, anyway, that takes a lot of push from the management team and from a strong CEO to say, this is how we could make this board a strategic advantage and help to refactor and think about the skills that are there, et cetera, in order to get to that place. And there's probably not enough of that. It's like an afterthought for too many teams and not something that's front and center.
So you've been on both sides of this, okay? And so what is interesting to me is this. There are definitely management teams who have said, I want to build a board that stays the heck out of my way. They do their governance stuff. They do their Sarbanes-Oxley stuff. They make sure that we have internal controls. But these guys maybe have never run anything in their lives. And, it's not the kind of thing that if you've never run a company before, or you weren't at the highest levels of a company, that you go into the arena and all of a sudden, I'm giving the management team advice. And I've seen management teams who are like, just get out of my way. And then there's other people, if you have a board which has ex-CEOs on it, and if they make the management team understand, look, you can sit down with me for coffee. You can run stuff by me. I'm not going to call you out in a board meeting, or I'm not going to make you look bad, but come talk to me. Let's exchange ideas. And, within a company, you can keep all those discussions private. Otherwise, the CEO has to go outside, which sometimes you can talk about stuff, sometimes you can't. And so, again, it's a very, very interesting dynamic where you have to have incredible synergy between management and the board for the management to have the confidence that they trust the board not to have their control fantasies play out to the detriment of an organization. And as you probably know, once they're at loggerheads, you're never going to have a really good outcome. You're just not.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. It's an interesting thing, as I guess maybe my approach, I might be a little more sharp elbowed in some ways. Like I will call the CEO out around the table if the quality of the materials isn't where it needs to be, or something doesn't make sense, et cetera. But I think that's it's less about me being sharp elbowed. It's just more about the relationship that we have. I mean, I think an amazing relationship, a board kind of relationship, is when you're an operator sitting around a board, former CEO sitting around a board. If that CEO is not texting you or pinging you, and at least once every couple of weeks, it's probably not working the way that it needs to, and you might not have the right skill set to really help them. But I think you want to build that trusted resource capability and be able to to have to say, hey, that doesn't make sense, and that's not good enough. And to have that not be like some kind of a hyper political situation. And I think that's possible if you're really thoughtful about how you compose your board and what you need to get where you're headed. I think a lot of boards, frankly, even if they want to get there, they set expectations incorrectly going in. Why is it's not like boards aren't a life sentence, or they're not a life right. And I think a lot of people don't like to have that. They think it's an uncomfortable conversation, and too frequently it probably is. It shouldn't be uncomfortable to say, hey, we've been thinking about where the board is going. The board should be active in this, by the way, thinking about what the board needs. Do we have the right kind of skill for what we're building next and where we're headed to next? And if not, we're going to have to rotate folks. And I think that's a super healthy process to just be evaluating that every year. But I think we've allowed it because, for a lot of people, they think about status in being in a board, or there's an economic component to being on a board. But I think we all have to earn our spot, every meeting, every time we interact with the management team, and every strategic session that we run through, we should be thinking about it that way, just like that management team is thinking about it that way. So I'm hopeful we get more of that, because I am starting to see more of that dynamic where you're having more 1 year views, where folks are having those more active dialogues. And I think when you have that, you just have a more balanced environment where you can have governance factors, and you can still have continuity, but you're actively evaluating, here's where we are, here's where we're going. Do we have the skills? Do we have the right connectivity? Do we have the right capabilities to help this team deliver a better outcome? Because that's really what we're there to do.
100%. And I would say, going back to something you said, earlier about what a board can do, when you talked about Groupon, you said, I was okay having brilliant people around me as the CEO, and having them maybe even, more brilliant or more talented than I was in certain areas. That takes a CEO to have an unusual sense of self-awareness and not so much insecurity, that they're willing to have people on a board who they can trust to come to talk to and say, yeah, we're thinking about, going into this situation, or we're thinking about expanding this product line, or we're thinking about accelerating something. Have you thought about what you would do or how you would do it? Or did you ever come across something like that? I think that it takes a certain kind of personality as a CEO to have that level of humility and willing to collaborate, which it certainly happens, but it doesn't happen all the time.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think I don't think there's enough. There's probably not enough humility in corporate leadership, period. It's just been rewarded, like having that massive ego and not willing to take help from folks, and the hero complex has been rewarded for too long. But I think the best do this, and they do it naturally. Even folks that do, they may have big egos, they also know just the power of having people that are better. And I'd even go back to my time at Amazon, and I think the folks around that table, we're so much better than Jeff at so many things. They weren't Jeff Bezos, but they were better than him at supply chain and logistics, and he was totally comfortable having them and required them to be better at supply chain and logistics. So I think the best in get that. I'm not saying, and I'm for sure not in that best category, but I think the best get it for sure and build around themselves in really potent ways.
That's great. Okay, so let me turn your attention to an area that's been in the media a little bit. We've seen some controversies, maybe spectacular controversies, in companies that did some controversial marketing and advertising. And so obviously, you've been involved in marketing for so many years.
Yeah.
And, what do you say to companies that maybe radically change their message to go in ways that maybe America isn't ready for, or their customer base isn't ready for which they've gotten severe blowback? What would you say to them about, hey, next time do this, or look at these kinds of things? Because I know you've reviewed these things from our prior discussions.
Yeah, look, I've been really fortunate in my career to work with companies that have that have just had it in their DNA to be incredibly customer focused, and not just talk about it like it's on a piece of paper and it's a good soundbite, but to truly understand and respect their customers and do things that were uneconomic because they were the right things to do for customers. And I do think it's a mistake to be willing to flap in the wind with whatever's prevailing at a time, if that puts you at odds with your customers, or even worse, that you don't really know, you don't respect your customers enough to know deeply who they are, what they care about, how they think about your brand or your company or your product, what motivates them, what demotivates them. I think there's just a lot of what we've seen has just been a lack of customer centricity and a lack of customer insights. And also, I think, frankly, a lack of definitions of success, like and a fully considered definition of success in a lot of the campaigns that you've seen go badly sideways. But I think the root of it is getting into the detail of knowing who your customers are, like really what makes them tick, fear, pain, the emotional connections. What do they see in your brand versus others historically, et cetera? And then I think when you have that deep foundation on the customer, you can make much smarter decisions about where you tread and where you don't. And there's lots of strategies to grow a business that don't require disrespecting your customer. If you want to move to a different customer base, if something you want to do will alienate one, it's called a line extension, or create another brand, or go acquire one that really resonates with the population that you're looking to grow to. You just can't use like marketing as some single brushstroke to try to become everything to everybody. Like the graveyard is littered with brands that have made that mistake. And it's painful to watch. I mean, it is painful to watch, especially when it's when it's really caught in things that are thorny, and they're thorny from any vantage point. And so I think companies are not being careful enough with their existing customer bases and making those decisions consciously. And I respect the company that consciously enters the fray. Like if they enter the fray with full visibility and they're saying, hey, we're going here because this is what we believe. And even if that alienates customers, we're willing to fire customers, like, hey, good for them. I just don't think that's mostly what's happening. I think it's just, I think too many management teams are not in the details enough with their customers, and they're definitely not in the details enough for marketing. I think for too many companies, marketing is a cost center, and not something that they take seriously.
So there's so much here to unpack. So I'm gonna say to you that I think first, when you are, and you would know this better than I would, if you're going to think about what the reaction is going to be to any particular consumer product move, maybe even other product move.
Sure.
Obviously, the blocking and tackling is looking at customers and what they want and how they do that, whether they have the skill set and whether they know how to analyze, they have the analytics team to figure that out. But then, another thing that I think people don't necessarily talk about is, what is the culture of the employees in the company or the other stakeholders? Because
Sure.
What if you think you might have customers, it's 50-50, or maybe they'd like it a little bit, maybe they like it a lot. But what if the culture of your company is such where the people that are the most important human capital, or the most important capital maybe that you have, aren't up for it? Then what? Then what?
Yeah. I mean, then you get what we've seen over the last 6 months with some folks making some very interesting decisions on their marketing strategies. But yeah, you get revolt, where I think people are very willing, and it's one of every time I travel overseas, I'm always, it's one of the weird things we love to do. We love going into grocery stores. And so you go into a grocery store in most parts of the world, and you don't see 900 kinds of whatever you're looking for. You're like, there's 2 ketchups or something. There's not 47 different ketchups. And there's so many options for people, which is why you have to respect them. You have to respect that people have options, that same thing applies to the people who work in these buildings every day and work in factories and work in the supply chain. They have options as well. And I think if your company is actually making a pretty decent product or is a lauded brand, I hope a lot of the people in the business that are working there, a lot of your employees are your customers. So I just think there's a lack of respect for it. And probably not just probably a lack of detail orientation and challenging some of these strategies. And it's not about micromanagement. It's not about putting people on kind of short leashes, quote unquote, for making decisions. But it's actually when you're talking about something that impacts the broad scope of a brand, its reach, how it communicates with core stakeholders. That is the realm of leadership teams. And I think too often it's just pushed off, or it's whatever. At a board meeting, somebody shows the occasional commercial. But too many CEOs don't jump in and unpack that strategy that drove that commercial or that strategy that drove that campaign. And it's just, it's number 75 on the list when it probably should be number 3 or 4.
You use the L word, which was just going through my mind, leadership. And so, if you've got to know who works around you, you've got to know your customers, you have to be engaged. And if you're going to, again, take that step to be disruptive, you've got to know how they're going to react, right? I mean, isn't that the blocking and tackling of leadership, that you've got to know where that's going to go?
It really is. I think so much as conscious decision making, right? Like sort of blocking and tackling, for sure. And by the way, there are companies who do this really well, who are incredibly authentic, and are unabashed in their points of view, and they attract a certain customer group, and they celebrate that, and they are who they are. And the easiest one that pops into everybody's head usually when this kind of conversation comes up is Patagonia. Patagonia has an incredibly strong point of view on how they do things, and they've done structural things, etc. They don't do lots of things because of it, and they don't make apologies for it. And so I think there's conscious decision making all the way to the top about who they are, what they stand for, how they're going to communicate, and what the ramifications of that are. And I think we can always point at any one brand and say, boy, they could have done X, Y, or Z better. But I think they're a shining example of folks that are making conscious decisions about stepping into thorny territory.
I have to say, and I don't say this just because I've gotten to know you, when CEOs may think that they're going to make a controversial decision like that, somebody like you, who's been a CMO and a CEO and run a public company, probably have a lot to offer them in terms of what to advise them about the risks, the cost benefit analysis of doing something like that.
Yeah. I don't know, just maybe scar tissue. But look, I think there's probably not enough challenge in some of those situations coming from boards, coming from the rest of the management team. Sure. When those decisions are made, where it's like, who's this about? Is this about you, or is this about this enterprise and the stakeholders that we serve? Because those are different things. Like, and whatever bags you carry into the office every day, those are your bags. Like, and so there's just not enough of, like, when you decide to go step into the thorny territory, who's it about? And there's, I don't think there's probably not enough challenge on some of those things, and enough of that candid talk in leadership teams that will call out the CEO and it's like, what are you talking about? Is this your belief, or is this the belief of our team? Is this the belief of the company, our board, our investors, our customers? And I think those are incredible debates to have and discussions to have. They're probably just not as free flowing as they need to be.
That makes sense. Well, look, I've kept you for a hot minute. This has been a great discussion, though, and I really appreciate you being on the Block and Tackle show today. I may have you back. You're pretty, you might be a little bit insightful, so I think I'd love to have you back. And this was wonderful, and I think there's a lot that people could learn from your perspective and your experience. So, really, really, thanks for coming, Rich. It was a great chat.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm happy to come back anytime. I'm a fan. I always enjoy our conversations. So I appreciate all the kind words. I don't deserve any of them, but I appreciate it nonetheless.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks for the episode. Take care.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning in. If you want more info on the show, please visit blockandtackleshow.com. And you can also email me at carl@blockandtackleshow.com. Thanks for tuning in.